Okay, so here we are. Thank you for joining us. I think in these summer months, we're going to have a little thinner class, just because people's schedules people go out of town and things like that. So, um, keep an eye on our communications for the college just to make sure that class is up and running. But here we are this week. So, before we begin, let me put our um, link in the chat. There's that. Okay, if you would like to review anything or catch up on anything, you can please check out there at the link. Okay, we are in the middle of the 10th chapter of Kohelet, and we are discussing perhaps the I would say one of the most difficult series of verses in the book so far. And actually, so far is kind of funny. We're nearing the end of the book. Slowly, we'll get there eventually. But we are at 10 out of there's 12 chapters altogether, so we're in the middle of the 10th chapter. So we are, I guess, nearing the end of it. What we have over here is again these series of verses where he seems to address this very difficult topic of how there seems to be almost a divine injustice. Now things just they don't make sense. It doesn't make sense that things should be a certain way. At first, he puts this kind of in the context of the good things happening to bad people, bad things happening to good people, kind of that, ultimate divine question of how could it possibly be that, that type of thing. However, eventually he seems to veer away from that directly, and he says, well, if you think about it, it's really just, it happens to everybody. People will work their whole lives on one thing, and then that thing will be their downfall. The very thing that they dedicated themselves to will be their downfall. He gives a bunch of examples of that. Somebody tears down a wall, and then a snake comes out to bite him. Or a person goes and digs a pit, and they fall into the pit. And those were destructive examples where almost, well, yeah, they set themselves up for failure. They're doing something destructive. Of course, it's possible that they could hurt themselves. But then we had a couple of constructive examples too, where somebody is a stone cutter, so they're doing things for a good purpose. And that person gets, hit by his own stone, or a wood chopper who gets hurt by their own wood. Okay, so then the response would be, well, then it's really just all because a person lacks preparation. That's probably why they don't prepare properly. They don't work with the Boy Scout motto, safety first. They don't. That's why they're getting hurt. They don't have that right type of mindset. And that's where we got into verse number 10 last week, where he seems to indicate that preparation has nothing to do with it. And his example is where you have a soldier or a whole army of soldiers that they're totally unprepared for battle. They've got no weapons. They've got, or their weapons are not sharp or anything, and yet they seem to win the war. And that just seems to make no sense. It's not about preparation. He's going to give us the opposite example this week. I really should have done this week's first verse last week, but that's just the way we didn't have enough time last week. So. There seems to be this lack of justice, of this divine justice, because look, the people can have no preparation, and they'll be they win the war. It makes no sense. So it's not all about preparation. It kind of reminds me. I mean, it's constant. We were surrounded by these stories out of Ukraine, where it was almost a certain that the Russians would just march into Ukraine and take over, and that would be it. And then, kind of like a Hanukkah story, the Ukrainians really have shown that they didn't have their weapons weren't sharpened, and and nevertheless they seem to be doing pretty well. Thank God for that. Anyway, so it kind of just reminds me of that kind of story. It's like, wait, like that doesn't make sense. If it was all based on nature and preparation, there's no reason why it should work out like that. But other things seem to come into play. I want to take one look back at last week's last verse, because I want to reconsider the way I translated the end of the verse. So if you'll bear with me, Here, we'll go up. Sorry. All right. Let's go up here. This is last week's verse. Now, I'm just going to read this again. We did see this last week, but I'm going to read it again because I want to revisit these last three words. He says, "In kehaha barzel, if the iron is dull, the who and the soldier, this person, lo fanim kilkal, does not sharpen the edge. The chayalimi gaber, and nevertheless, the soldiers overcome." Okay, so that's our case. That's the example he's giving us to prove that preparation doesn't even help you, even if you are prepared. Again, even if you're trying to go with Boy Scouts motto, well, you can have cases where a person has no preparation and they win. And I think I read this. I wasn't happy with my translation of the last three words last week, so I want to look at it again. And he says, "V'yitron hachsher chachma." So literally that means, and the advantage. There's an advantage to preparation that is wisdom, or wisdom is the advantage to preparation, or it is wise to have the advantage of preparation. So that's where it kind of gets confusing, is which way is he saying? Is he saying that chokhmah is yitron hachsher? That's kind of the simplest way of reading it. Wisdom would be to prepare more. Well, that seems to go against what we're saying. Or is it that v'yitron hachsher chachma, that better is to prepare with wisdom? So again, I was kind of stuck on how to read that. Looking at it again and looking at it specifically in the context of the next verse, I think it's a question. So after we see that the armies are winning even without any preparation, v'yitron hachsher chachma, is it really that wise to prepare? Does it show a person's wisdom that they're prepared? No, see, preparation, you can run into things without preparing at all. I remember as a teenager, back in my high school, it was like, if you had one example of where the teacher was wrong, you'd say, "Oh, see, I got the teacher wrong. I overcame the teacher." You have one what's the word I'm looking for? One case of anecdotal evidence, and you say, "Oh, I throw away the whole rule." So in a certain sense, that's kind of the sense you're getting over here too. Is like, look, it can happen. It can happen that an unprepared army that has nothing going for it will actually win the war. And you're going to tell me, again, that's why I'm reading a question mark over here. V'yitron hachsher chachma? Is it really that wise to prepare, to always, again, Boy Scouts always prepared? Is that really that wise? It does have nothing to do with it. Okay, so again, this is last week's verse, but I just wanted to. I think that is a better way to read those last three words over there. I think it makes a little more sense in context. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why I said that is because we have the same phrase show up in the next verse over here, and it's interesting. It's kind of used in the opposite sense. So this is this week's verse, first verse over here, chapter 10, verse 11. Okay, this is actually a really pretty well-known verse. A lot of the verses around here are pretty well known. But he says like this: Im yishoch hanachash below lachash. If a serpent bites without whispering, ve'ein yitron leval halashon, and there is no advantage to the owner of the tongue. Okay, that is some strange phraseology there. Let's just see it one more time, just reading the words. Im yishoch hanachash below lachash, if the snake bites without whispering, ve'ein yitron leval halashon, and there is no advantage to the owner of the tongue. Okay, so we have a lot of things to take care of here. Let's just take care of what the words mean first. Nachash is a snake. That's pretty straightforward throughout all of Tanakh. Is the nachash? It's the same phrase used by the snake in Genesis, in the original story, right at the beginning of the Torah. Yishoch seems to indicate biting. Okay, neshicha is biting. It's used in that sense in a number of different places. Trying to think. I believe in the curses of, or the blessings that were meant to be curses of Bilam, he uses that term yishoch to mean biting. So yeah, that is biting. The confusing one over here is this lachash. Lachash does mean whispering. Now the question is, who's whispering over here? All right, that's the big question. if the snake bites without whispering. And if you look at all the commentaries, I mean, nearly all the commentaries say that it's a reference to a snake charmer. Okay, so if a snake bites, it's because there's no charmer. Right, that's how a lot of the commentaries read this verse. So a charmer would be, that's we kind of have this vision in our heads of, what is it? It's I think in the, if I remember correctly, it's a scene in The Man Who Would Be King, very old movie now at this point, where there's a snake charmer. The guy plays the little flute, and the cobra comes out of the basket. So that's kind of what a lot of the commentaries are learning, that a lachash, in this case, again, the word means to whisper. So they say it's the whispers of the charmer, right? So a lot of the commentators are learning that if the snake bites, it's because there's no charmer, because there's no one to charm the snake. Okay, that's what a lot of the commentaries explain. I'm actually surprised that they all jump there, because first of all, the construction, the word construction is a little off for that. Okay, it's, I guess you could read it as if the snake bites, below lachash, it is because there is with no whisper. Okay, I mean, I guess that's one way. That's how you would have to read it. The bet over here is the letter that's kind of throwing me off. I don't love that explanation. And again, it's kind of distant. We didn't mention a snake charmer. It's kind of coming out of the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, I don't necessarily see why there's a need to come to that, particularly because what do we know about snakes? Okay, so they have no legs, they crawl on the ground, they bite, they tend to be poisonous, not all of them. They hiss and they rattle. They do something to warn you that they're about to bite. Okay, so I when I hear whispering in reference to a snake, my mind immediately goes to the hissing. So in that case, if we were to say that the lachash in this case is not the whispers of the snake charmer, but rather it's the hissing of the snake. And he says, "Im yishoch hanachash below lachash." What happens if a snake bites without whispering? In other words, it can happen that you can have a snake that bites without any whisper at all, without a hiss at all. It doesn't warn you, because I grew up in Colorado. So in Colorado, it's known, if you hear the rattle, you want to take precautions right away. If you hear a rattlesnake, because that's the local snake there. I mean, there's a lot of local snakes there, but yeah, that's kind of the one. If you're on a hike somewhere and you hear that rattle, you want to step away from where you are and stay safe. So in other words, the snake usually will warn you, but there can be a case of a snake. There are snakes that will bite without any hiss at all, without any warning at all. So I kind of look at that as the corresponding case to our last case. So again, what was our last case? We had people who ran into battle with no preparation at all, and they won. So that's kind of telling you on this side that preparation doesn't do anything. And here in the same sentence, we've got this other kind of preparation that you can have kind of an opposite case where without any warning, it's kind of preparation from another side, right? Preparation is, the first case is the battle, the forces of battle going into battle without preparing themselves. This is being attacked without any warning. So it can happen, in this case, if is kind of setting up a story. In Yishoch hanachash below lachash, it can happen that the snake will bite without any warning at all. So again, laying this kind of war against preparation, if you will. King Solomon's telling us again, like, look, see, there's another case where how much can you be prepared? The person's walking on a hike. If they hear the hiss, if they hear the rattle of the rattlesnake, then that's one thing. But the snake can just jump out of nowhere and not bite them at all. So again, we're going back to our Boy Scouts, right? Always prepared. How prepared can you be? All right. How good is your prep going to be for you? How well is it going to work for you? It can happen. A snake can bite without any warning at all, without any hissing at all. Okay. And therefore he says, "Ve'ein yitron leval halashon." And there seems to be no advantage to the owner of the tongue. That's that, or analysis is a very interesting thing, especially when we're talking about snakes, right? So snakes again, they've what are things we know about snakes? Well, again, they crawl and they hiss and they bite and they've got that funny tongue. They got that forked tongue of the snake. So it's kind of again one of these in the same verse. We've got a bunch of identifying features that are so closely related to snakes. When I think of snakes, one of the things I'm going to think about is the tongue. So if a snake in Yitron Leval HaLashon, there's no advantage to the one who has the tongue. Meaning, if a snake does hiss, that's not to their advantage. To go and prepare, why would they prepare you for the fact, not you, not anyone listening, of course, God forbid. But why would the snake go and warn its prey that it's about to attack? There's no advantage to that. It doesn't make sense for a snake to go and do that. Ein Yitron Leval HaLashon. There is no advantage to warning a person's enemies. So it's kind of like, again, kind of a more relevant and modern day example is we've got this kind of adversarial relationship going on with China right now, and we're kind of butting heads a lot, and each country is flexing its muscles in different ways, particularly around Taiwan. I don't want to get too stuck into modern current events, but what is it helping? What does it help to go sit there and flex your muscle to your enemy and show them your strength and have, maybe sometimes it's better to attack without warning first. And again, so this would be the other side of preparation is, actually sometimes not showing off and not preparing yourself and not showing off your preparation might be advantageous. There's no advantage to the snake that sticks out his tongue and is warning, is hissing, and is letting the prey know that they're about to attack. That actually makes it less likely that they'll get their prey. So in that sense, again, this verse over here is the corresponding verse to the last verse. You got people who run into battle without any preparation, they win. And then when people do prepare and they show themselves off that they're preparing, that actually makes it less likely that they're going to win. So there's this kind of strange relationship with preparation, well, why do I go through this whole process? And what does it all matter, again, in this divine kind of injustice that we seem to have over here? It just doesn't make any sense to me, is what King Solomon seems to be saying. Again, this term Yitron showing up where it showed up in the last verse also. What's the advantage? There's no advantage to the owner of the tongue. The sages say an interesting idea over here. This is not the simple explanation of the verse at all, but it's an interesting take on the verse. The sages point out that they say this in kind of an allegorical sense, that in the future, meaning in the times of the Messiah or Mashiach or whatever exact period they're talking about, that all the animals of the world will come and gather onto the snake, gather up against the snake, and they'll ask, lions go and they trample their prey and they eat their prey. Wolves go and they trample their prey, they take their prey down, they eat their prey. But snakes very often will poison their prey and just keep on moving. The snake's not going to eat a human, right? Generally, unless it's a very large snake. But a lot of those rattlesnakes, things like that, they're not going to eat a human. So why would they ever attack a human? What advantage does a snake have against, why does it, what's the point of it attacking things that it's not even planning on eating? I mean, it's not for its own survival. It's why attack. This is the question that the animal kingdom is going to ask the snake in the future times. Okay, again, this is some allegorical in the allegorical sense. And so the response to the snake is Ve'ein Yitron Leval HaLashon, that if you're asking me why I do it, I've got somebody better you should ask why they do it. And that's somebody who gossips. Somebody who gossips has the same thing. They don't get anything out of their gossip. They don't gain. You don't feel, sorry, you don't, it doesn't make you any money. It doesn't it doesn't give you power or anything like that. If a person goes and speaks and gossips about other people, what advantage is there for them? You're complaining about me that I poison people. There's much worse people than me. There's the person, the Baal HaLashon, the one who speaks Lashon Hara, the person who gossips all the time. That person, what advantage do they have? So that's kind of the snake's response. Again, an interesting allegorical take on the same verse. There's also actually, I would once I got a second here. One other nice rendition that the sages place on it is that if hard times are coming, they say if they learn nachash is instead of referring to the snake, it's also the same word. Nechoshet is copper. So they say if the skies are red like copper, meaning they're not giving any rain at all, it's a dry drought season. They say that it's because below lachash there's nobody whispering, meaning there's nobody praying, right? People should be praying more. That's why rain's not coming. Also, a nice explanation. Again, clearly not the meaning of the verse at all, but it is definitely a nice kind of idea to take away. Is that yeah, if things are going badly, learn how to turn to God with the problems in your life. Okay, again, a nice religious take on it, if you will. Okay, so that's this verse over here. And I would say that this is kind of the end of this series of verses where he's going on this this darker query or series of questions. And as we said in the past, part of the reason is why is he doing this suddenly over here is because he's saying that this is something that a wise person can do also. The part of wisdom is not just thinking you know all the answers, it's also having the questions that are a little more difficult. And so he wants to show us also that he's willing to accept that there are questions here that are very difficult questions. As I mentioned when we began this series of verses, it was the beginning of the chapter or so, a couple verses into the chapter, I think, is that this is really not the place where this question is asked. I mean, it is asked here clearly, as we saw, but the real source of this whole question, the Jewish source of the place for discussing good things happening to bad people, bad things happening to good people, is the book of Job, Eov, as we call it in Hebrew. So that's where we would really find this question really fleshed out. He might give us a little bit of an answer in the coming verses. I haven't seen all the way through yet to see if he gives us a full answer for it. But we'll keep our eyes open. He might take a while to get there. Again, another good feature of a wise person is that they'll try to properly flesh out the answer instead of trying to give it to you on one foot. So that leads us to verse number 12. And I think here what we're going to do over here is he's going to take at least one aspect of this question. This is actually, you find this in the Talmud a lot of times. So I'll ask a series of questions and say there's a bunch of good questions, great questions. We'll answer one of the questions, whether that means you could then extrapolate to the rest of them, or whether that just means that this is all I can offer you right now. But he's going to take one feature first and discuss that feature. All right, so the first feature he's going to really get into is this question of preparation, because that's really where he ended off. He ended off talking about preparation. How prepared can you be in the first place? What does it mean to be prepared? What does it help you if you are? Maybe preparation can be bad for you. All right, there's no advantage for the snake to hiss at its enemy, right? At its prey. It's much better for it to just strike, right? So he has this kind of strange issue with preparation. So he wants to take this on first, but as I said, he's going to take a little time to build this up, okay? And so what he starts off with in this specific point, the first thing he brings up is that, as he often does, he's going to start off with saying, well, let's take a look at the difference between a wise person and a fool, okay? And through this reframing of the wise person and the fool debate, he's going to hopefully give us a new sense of why preparation is important, okay? So, again, this is something he's done a number of times now, but it's to build up to a specific point. All right, so he says, Divrei fi chacham chen. The words of the mouth of the wise are favorable. V'siftot kisil tivla'enu, and the lips of the fool swallow them up. Okay, let's read that again. Divrei fi chacham chen. The words of the mouth of the wise are graceful. V'siftot kisil tivlaenu, and the lips of the fool swallowed them up. Okay, so the first thing we have to address is swallow who up, right? Who's being swallowed up? Tivlaenu. I tried to think about that for a little bit. I want to make sure I got that right. Tivlaenu is just swallows them, plural, up. It swallows them up. All right. So that doesn't really help us, right? It doesn't tell us who we're talking about. The commentaries over here give us a little bit of they enlighten us a little bit of what's going on. And they say that the words of the wise provide favor. So favor, chen is in general an interesting word. It's a pretty versatile word, actually. It kind of means beauty in some sense, grace, favor. It's related to the word free, F-R-E-E, free, which would be chinam. So in some senses, we'll find that when we pray for chen from Hashem, when we pray to God for chen, very often is what we're praying for is a free gift. We don't deserve it, but we're asking for it anyway. Okay, so that's a lot of times when you hear the term chen thrown out in a prayer, and we have that a lot by in the high holidays service. We ask for chen quite often. Kel rachum v'chanun. So we say Hashem, kel rachum v'chanun. God, who is, or Hashem, who is the God of mercy and chen. So that the idea is we're kind of asking for a freebie. We don't necessarily deserve the good stuff sometimes. Right? So chen definitely is a versatile word. It's got a lot of different meanings. But what it does seem to indicate is the creation of a relationship between two things. It seems to be a bridge between two things. We find that that I think it was Rivka, the Rebecca of the matriarchs of the Jewish people. If I remember correctly, it says over there that she was nosat chen. She had this chen. She had this grace. So what that means is, what is beauty? What is grace? What are all these things? What is kindness? This free kindness. It's a way to bridge two people together. So in that sense, the words of the mouth of the wise create this bridging effect. All right, they create this ability to connect with other people. So the wise person is able to speak, and their words bring people in. Okay, they draw people in a good way, right? They include other people. And it's funny because then you have the contrast over here. Bala, bet lamed ayin, means to swallow, right? We said it swallows them up. Who is the them, right? So chen is a bridging term. Chen is a term that brings two groups of people together. And swallowing is also the incorporation of one thing into another thing. But the second thing doesn't maintain its individuality, right? It overwhelms the other thing. So whereas the words of the wise bridge people together, it has this ability to create beauty, grace, this selfless kindness thing. And on the other hand, the lips of the fools swallow up the listener. So there's a speaker. In one case, the speaker is the wise person. In the other case, the speaker is the fool. And the speaker, and there's a listener. Okay. So in the case of the words of the mouth of the wise bridge people together. You remain who you are. I remain who I am. But it brings us together. It creates a connection between the two of us. As opposed to a fool talking, the lips of the fool swallow up the second person. The listener gets swallowed up entirely. They lose their own individuality in the conversation. Okay, so that's the first thing. That's the first thing that he's pointing out over here. Once again, we're going to contrast the fool and the wise person. Well, here's one thing. Because number one, the wise person includes you in the conversation. They bridge that gap with you. The fool overwhelms. He takes over the conversation. He swallows up the listener. Okay. There's another interesting thing that's also visible in this verse over here is the difference between how the wise person speaks and how the fool speaks. The wise person speaks pi chacham, with the mouth of the wise person. So they speak with their mouth, meaning the whole mouth. There's nothing hiding necessarily in the way that the wise person speaks. The wise person, every part of their mouth is involved in the process. they're not holding anything back. They'll speak to you full-throatedly. They'll tell you exactly what they mean to say, and they're not going to hold things back. As opposed to the fool only uses the lips. Everything else is hidden behind it. They're just kind of expressing things on the outside, but they're not sharing with you what's really going on the inside. So that's another difference we see in this verse. Just from the wording of the verse over here, you find that there's a difference between how a wise person speaks. A wise person states what they mean. They don't hold things back necessarily, as opposed to the fool. The fool just speaks from the outside. It's just from the lips. Okay, so again, two differences, two contrasts between the wise person and the fool. Once again, the wise person speaks with their entire mouth, their full mouth, and bridges the gap between two people, and each person remains individual. And then you have the fool who only speaks, who hides everything that they really mean to say, speaks with their lips and swallows up the listener. They don't allow the listener to remain individual. Okay, so those are some pretty broad terms. What he's going to do over here is to give us now an explanation of what happens. What do these fools do? How do these fools talk exactly? Okay, so that leads us to verse number 13. This is the last verse we're going to do tonight. And discussing the way that the fool speaks. He says, Tchilat divrei fihu sichlut. The beginning of the words of their mouth are foolishness. Okay, we've seen a lot of terms for foolishness, so we'll get back to what sichlut is specifically. Va'acharit pihu, and the end of their mouth, holelut ra'ah, is this wicked craziness, insanity. Okay, so once again, Tchilat divrei fihu sichlut, the beginning of the words of their mouths, is foolishness. Va'acharit fihu holelut ra'ah, and the end of their mouths is this wicked craziness, this evil craziness. So he's trying to tell us something about the way that the fool speaks, and how does the fool draw people in, which is not, again, draw people in a negative way, overwhelms the other person, it overwhelms the listener. Okay, and so he says, well, you have to understand, it's a process. The beginning is they talk about things in sichlut, in this foolishness. Now, we've had sichlut a number of times already. Most recently, in the past chapter or two, it did not show up that often, and then it only started coming up more in more recent verses. And what we've been saying, how we've been explaining sichlut, is that sichlut sachel is this cynical foolishness, is this cynicism, this inability to, or lack of desire to be serious about things. Okay, this referred to elsewhere as leitzanut, as mockery or scorn, right? So it's interesting. Again, he's bringing that up over here. He's saying the beginning, the way the fool starts to get you, is the fool first gives the listener sichlut, gives the listener a dose of this cynicism. Okay, and then by the end of it, draws the person into crazy wickedness, or wicked craziness, actually. We've had Holelut now a number of times. It's come up. As we mentioned every time, Holel seems to be like what we would call in English, in our vernacular, we refer to as craziness. Crazy is not a useful word. It's actually not really that polite of a word either, for that matter. But it kind of is the best word for the occasion. All right, Holelut means to go out of the realm of normal action. Okay, actually, that's probably a better way to explain it. Holelut Ra would mean to act wickedly in a way that's abnormal. Okay, we've mentioned every time it comes up, we mention that Hallel as the idea of praise is related to this, because in Hallel, when a person sings Hallel to God, the idea would be that we are overwhelmed with a desire to praise God, that it makes us act in an abnormal way. David being kind of the archetype of that, where when they brought in the ark, when they brought it to Jerusalem, he was dancing in the street like a crazy person, right? And his wife at the time, one of his wives at the time, Michal, said, "Why are you acting so crazy?" And he responded, "How can I not? You know, it was such a wonderful thing is happening." So David, being the archetype of Hallel, of that abnormal reaction of praise. So here is Holy Luke, but in other sense, and this is how he's always King Solomon always uses Hallel to be. It's as a negative. It's this abnormal, wicked abnormality. I think this is a very simple verse over here, in a sense, because it's saying, how does a fool get hurt? If how does it come to pass that the fool speaks and people get sucked into what they're saying and get drawn into what they're saying? Well, there's a process they go through. Yes, they begin with creating cynicism. They begin with creating a place where there's a suspension of the things we believe in. There's a suspension of perhaps of values. Oh well, what's the point of that all anyway? What's the big deal with that all anyway? It's unimportant. Saying things that are important, and again, throwing them away and saying it's unimportant. Okay, well, that slow breakdown of that social structure, of those social norms, that deconstruction of the social construct will then go and slowly lead to a point where people are doing things or listening and agreeing to things that they never would have listened to or done or agreed to in the first place. Things that we could all have agreed to were wicked abnormalities, abnormal levels of wickedness. And you have people who would otherwise be really considered rather sane people and doing these things. We can't help but think of the Nazis, or more than the Nazis, of the Germans who were being led by the Nazis. Again, we're Jewish. We can't help but think of that. You had these people who were neighbors, and it boggles the mind that, and we're not talking 150 years ago, we're not talking 300 years ago, we're talking 70, 80 years. It doesn't make sense in our minds to think that people who were, for all intents and purposes, some of the most cultured people around suddenly became mass murderers, and it doesn't make sense. Well, how do the lips of the fools swallow people up? It starts with these levels of cynicism. It starts with taking advantage of a crisis, of a chaos, or something like that, and saying, "Oh well, we got to get rid of the social structure. We got to undo the things that everyone has agreed to. Well, we'll get rid of this here, this here, this here." And then one thing leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. And then you're literally stuck in a situation of holy Luther, wicked abnormality, wicked craziness. Something that boggles the mind, doesn't make sense to us. How could it possibly be? But that's how the fool does it. The fool is not a stupid person. I think that's something we're seeing over here, is that the fool is not when you think of a court jester, a guy with a hat with bells on the end of the things. The fool is a very calculated person. It's the opposite of the chacham, because they use their wisdom, they use their noggin, they use their brains for the opposite of wisdom, for the opposite of goodness, I would say. Okay, so that's, I think, seeing over here is that there's how does it swallow a person up? How does it swallow the listener up? The way it does it is in this slow incremental way, but it's smart. They know what they're doing, right? The kasil, the fool. Okay, so again, looking back at the verse before, that's the difference between the wise person and the fool. And the reason why the fool is so powerful is because they have this ability to incrementally wear down your defenses to the point where people are doing things that they never would have done otherwise, they never would have considered doing in the first place. All right, so that again would be chapter 10, verse number 13. So that was, again, this week was verse number 11, 12, and 13. This is again, we're building up slowly to get to the point of where he's going to explain how preparation actually does make sense and when it's going to be appropriate, even though you'll find that preparation also might not help. we're going to see how we're going to just contrast those and see how it works out together. So with that, let's go back into the main screen. And all right, thank you for joining us again.